Your grandfather came home from World War II. He survived Normandy, the Bulge, the push to Berlin, came back to raise your father, to build the family that led to you. You've always assumed he was lucky, skilled, blessed. But what if he lived because a German soldier read 6 words on a piece of paper and chose not to pull the trigger? What if a promise signed by Eisenhower saved more American lives than any bomb ever dropped? This is the story of the biggest military operation you've never heard of, and it might explain why your family exists. London, December 1944. The war room at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force sits beneath layers of sandbagged concrete and steel. Maps cover every wall. Red pins mark German positions across France. Blue pins show Allied advances. Between them, a shrinking gap measured in blood. 3 men stand in the half-light of a planning table. Outside, V-2 rockets fall on the city. Inside, they face a problem that artillery cannot solve. The mathematics are brutal. 5 million German soldiers remain in the field. Every mile forward costs American lives. Every town, every river, every forest, paid for in body bags and telegrams to mothers. At this rate, the war could drag into 1946, maybe longer. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, 54 years old, has a letter on his desk. It arrived in April from Winston Churchill. The words still burn. Post-war France must be our friend. It is not alone a question of humanitarianism. It is also a question of high state policy. Eisenhower remembers the calculations. The bombing campaign to soften German defences killed 80,000 French civilians. 80,000. Churchill's number, Churchill's warning. Now the question is sharper. How do you end a war without killing everyone? The conventional answer, you don't. But Eisenhower didn't become Supreme Commander by accepting conventional answers. He looks at the 2 men across the table. One wears a general's stars. The other wears a civilian suit that doesn't quite fit the bunker. Between them, they're proposing something that sounds insane. They want to fight with paper, not orders, not propaganda in the traditional sense. Something different. 6 billion pieces of paper, each one a promise, each one signed with Eisenhower's own name. The plan has a single point of failure. If it works, it could save hundreds of thousands of lives. If it fails, it proves that psychological warfare is fantasy dressed up as strategy. Eisenhower's signature will appear on every leaflet. His credibility, his word, 6 billion times. There is no middle ground, no half measures. Either this works, or it becomes the most expensive mistake in military history. In December 1944, SHAF issues a directive. It forbids anyone from reproducing the Safe Conduct Pass on the back of other leaflets. The order exists to protect authenticity, to keep the document pure. But here's what the history books don't tell you. That directive didn't come from Eisenhower alone. It came from 2 men most people have never heard of. 2 men who bet their careers on a crazy idea that you could win a war by understanding what your enemy wanted more than you wanted them dead. Robert Alexis McClure doesn't look like a revolutionary, 47 years old. Brigadier General, born in Mattoon, Illinois on March 4, 1897. Joined the Philippine Constabulary at 19. Made infantry 2nd lieutenant during the Great War. Spent 2 decades learning that war is simple. You identify the objective, you apply force, you win or you die. Nothing in his training prepared him for this. McClure commands 2,300 personnel from 2 countries. Office of War Information, Office of Strategic Services, Political Warfare Executive, British Ministry of Information. A polyglot organization held together by shared purpose and sheer will. He's a soldier. He believes in discipline, order, clear chains of command. He understands artillery tables and logistics and the calculus of acceptable casualties. What he doesn't understand is Madison Avenue, but he's learning. Because the man across the table, the one in the civilian suit, that man speaks a different language, a language of psychology and persuasion and the dark art of making people want what you want them to want. Charles Douglas Jackson, 42 years old, born March 16, 1902 in New York City, Princeton graduate 1924, Time Incorporated since 1931, Deputy Chief, Psychological Warfare Division SHAF. Before the war, D. Jackson sold magazines. He understood what made people buy, what made them believe, what made them act. During the war he served in Turkey, watched Axis propaganda up close. Saw how the Germans used print and radio to manipulate entire populations, saw how it worked. Now he's applying those lessons in reverse. Jackson looks at war the way an advertiser looks at a market. The Germans aren't the enemy, they're the audience. The challenge isn't to kill them, it's to change their minds. McClure finds this perspective disturbing. War should be simple, honorable. You fight with weapons, not psychology. But the numbers don't lie. Every psychological operation that works saves American lives. That's the only metric that matters. So he listens to Jackson, and together they build something new. February 1944, the meeting that changes everything. McClure stands at the planning table, maps of France spread before him. Invasion is coming, everyone knows it. The question is what comes after. How many men will die in the hedgerows? How many in the forests? How many at the Rhine? We need a standard operating procedure, McClure says. His voice carries the flat certainty of a man who has seen what happens when procedures fail. One document, official, uniform across the entire front. Jackson paces. He always paces when he's thinking. His mind works in Madison Avenue rhythms, headlines, slogans, the perfect pitch. The Germans like things official, Jackson says, formal, orderly, even in chaos, even in defeat. They want paperwork. They want stamps. They want something that looks important. He stops pacing, looks directly at McClure. We give them exactly what they want. A piece of paper that looks like a stock certificate. Seals, signatures, the whole production. Make it so official they can't help but believe it. McClure considers this. Every instinct says it's manipulation. Dishonest, but war itself is dishonest. The question isn't whether to manipulate. The question is whether manipulation saves lives. Factualism, McClure says finally. The word tastes strange in his mouth. Everything must be true, 100%. If we lie once, we lose all credibility. Jackson nods. Agreed, we promise good treatment, food, medical care, safety, and we deliver, every time. The truth is our weapon. The proposal goes to Eisenhower. Eisenhower reads it twice, asks 3 questions, gets 3 answers. Then Churchill's letter surfaces in his mind. 80,000 French civilians dead. How many Germans will die if this fails? How many Americans? He thinks about the mathematics of war, the awful algebra, every battle a calculation, every advance a price paid in blood. What if there's another way? The proposal requires 80% of Britain's printing capacity, millions of pounds of paper, specialized inks, engraving that rivals banknotes, and Eisenhower's signature on every single leaflet. His name, his word, his credibility. If the Germans don't surrender, it proves psychological warfare is worthless, worse than worthless, a distraction from real fighting. A waste of resources that could have gone to bullets and bombs, but if it works. Eisenhower picks up his pen, signs the authorization, February 1944. The die is cast. The gamble is made. Within weeks, printing presses across Britain begin running 24 hours a day. The Passierschein takes shape, red paper, ornate borders. The seals of the United States and the United Kingdom at the top, Eisenhower's signature at the bottom. The text, in German and English, the German soldier who carries this safe conduct is using it as a sign of his genuine wish to give himself up. He is to be disarmed, to be well looked after, to receive food and medical attention as required, and to be removed from the danger zone as soon as possible. Simple words. Clear promise, Eisenhower's name. McClure establishes quality control, every batch checked, every seal verified. No errors, no variations. This isn't propaganda, this is a contract, and the contract must be perfect. Jackson handles the psychology, the paper weight, the fold, the size, everything calculated to feel important, official, real, because it is real. That's the genius, that's the gamble. They're not lying to the Germans. They're telling the truth in the most convincing way possible. By June 1944, 500 million leaflets sit ready. By August, 2 billion. By December, 4 billion. Eventually, nearly 6 billion total. The largest printing operation in military history. 80% of Britain's offset printing capacity dedicated to paper weapons, and not a single shot fired. The invasion comes. D-Day, Normandy, blood on the beaches. But behind the beach, something else is happening. Something quieter. Something that will change how wars are fought. The 8th Air Force begins dropping Passierschein over German positions. 80% of all leaflets come from those bombers, 10% from the RF, 5% from fighter bombers, 5% from artillery shells specially designed to scatter 1,500 leaflets per round. By June 1944, 900 artillery shells loaded with paper have been fired at German lines in the 1st Army sector alone. The Germans call them propaganda shells, mock them. Tell each other they're toilet paper, make jokes, but they pick them up, read them, fold them carefully, hide them in their pockets, their boots, inside their helmets, because the paper might be worthless. or it might save their lives, and in war, that's not a decision you make lightly. McClure watches the first prisoner interrogation reports, reads them 3 times, can't quite believe what they say. The leaflets are working, not perfectly, not universally, but working. German soldiers are surrendering with Passierschein in hand, waving them like white flags, treating them like official documents, like contracts, like promises they believe might actually be kept. Eisenhower reads the same reports, calls McClure to his office, asks one question: is it real? McClure doesn't hesitate. Yes, sir. It's real. June 1944 becomes July. July becomes August. The killing continues. But something has shifted. Some invisible line has been crossed. The Germans are starting to believe. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to save lives. The gamble is paying off. But the true cost won't be known until the war is over. And the real question won't be answered for years. Did they save lives, or did they just find a more efficient way to win? McClure lies awake some nights thinking about that question, about honor and manipulation, about what it means to be a soldier when the weapons are words instead of bullets. Jackson doesn't lose sleep, he sees it clearly. They gave the Germans a choice. That's more than Hitler ever did, and Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, the man whose signature appears on 6 billion promises. He knows the answer doesn't matter. What matters is ending the war. Everything else is philosophy, and philosophy doesn't stop bullets. But 6 months later, 77% of German prisoners will have read those leaflets. 80% will carry them when they surrender. 3 soldiers will share a single piece of paper because they believe it might save their lives, and they'll be right. The question isn't whether it will work. The question is, when it works, what does it cost? The devil is in the details. Get the paperweight wrong, it's trash. Get the ink shade wrong, it's propaganda. Get Eisenhower's signature wrong, it's a forgery. But get every detail perfect. Dot, and you create something enemy soldiers will risk execution to possess. Something they'll hide from their own officers. Something they'll trust more than their own commanders. March 1944. The printing plants of London work through the night. The Passierschein isn't just a leaflet. It's an engineering problem disguised as a document. Every detail matters. Paperweight, ink quality, the exact shade of red, the placement of seals, the curve of Eisenhower's signature. Get one detail wrong, and it's just another piece of propaganda. Something to laugh at. Something to use for kindling, or worse. Get every detail right, and it becomes something the Germans can believe in. Jackson supervises the first production run personally. Stands at the press watching sheet after sheet emerge, red paper with intricate borders that mimic banknote engraving, the kind of craftsmanship that says, this is official, this is real. This is important. At the top, 2 seals, the Great Seal of the United States on the left, the Royal Crest of the United Kingdom on the right, between them the promise, in German, in English, sometimes in French. At the bottom, Eisenhower's signature, not a stamp, not a facsimile. A reproduction so precise that holding the leaflet, you can almost feel the pen pressure. The slight variation in ink, the humanity behind the mark, that's the psychology Jackson understands. People don't trust perfection, they trust authenticity, the small imperfections that prove a human hand was involved. The text itself went through 17 revisions, every word tested, every phrase analyzed for maximum impact with minimum resistance. The German soldier who carries this safe conduct is using it as a sign of his genuine wish to give himself up. Genuine wish, not surrender, not defeat, a choice, an act of will. He is to be disarmed, to be well looked after, to receive food and medical attention as required, and to be removed from the danger zone as soon as possible. Specific promises, concrete, verifiable, food, medical care, safety, the things soldiers dream about when they're cold and hungry and watching their friends die. McClure ensures every promise can be kept. Issues orders to frontline commanders. Any German soldier surrendering with a Passierschein receives immediate medical screening. Hot food. Transport away from combat zones within 12 hours. The promises aren't propaganda. Their policy, written into standing orders, enforceable, real. Because if even one soldier surrenders and gets shot, the whole system collapses. Trust is fragile. Betrayal is forever. By May 1944, the printing operation consumes 80% of Britain's offset printing capacity. Other projects wait, government forms, ration cards, everything else deemed less critical than paper that might end the war. The numbers are staggering. 500 million leaflets by June, 2 billion by August, 4 billion by December, eventually nearly 6 billion total. 6 billion promises, 6 billion chances. 6 billion pieces of paper that say, you have a choice. Then comes the hardest part, getting them to the Germans. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The invasion begins at dawn. Paratroopers drop into darkness. Gliders crash into hedgerows. Landing craft hit Omaha Beach and Utah Beach and the killing starts. While men die on the sand, B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force fly over German positions inland. Their bomb bays don't carry explosives, they carry paper. Bundles of passierschein tumble through the air, burst at altitude, scatter on the wind, fall like snow across Normandy. German soldiers in their bunkers hear the planes, brace for bombs. Instead, they get leaflets. Some laugh, some curse, some carefully pick one up when no one is looking. Fold it small, hide it. The artillery barrage begins. Naval guns pound the Atlantic Wall. Field artillery from the landing zones fires inland. Among the shells carrying high explosives, 1 in 20 carries something different. Propaganda shells, special rounds designed to burst at optimal altitude. Each one carries 1,500 leaflets, compressed, spring-loaded, released by the explosion into a cloud of paper. By the end of June, 900 of these shells had been fired in the 1st Army sector alone. The leaflets don't always survive intact. The explosion that releases them can scorch the paper, tear it. Some arrive so damaged they're unreadable. Others land in mud or water and dissolve. But enough survive. Enough reach German hands. Enough to start spreading the word. There's a way out, an official way, signed by Eisenhower himself. The 8th Air Force carries 80% of the leaflet load. Squadrons diverted from bombing runs to drop paper instead. Some pilots complain, call it a waste, say they'd rather drop real bombs. The RF handles 10%, fighter bombers another 5%, artillery the final 5%. The distribution isn't random. Jackson and McClure study German positions, identify units that are isolated. Low on supplies, cut off from reinforcement, units that might be ready to quit if given an honourable way. The leaflets concentrate there, saturation drops, wave after wave, until every German soldier has seen one, touched one, made a choice about what to do with it. August 1944. The first reports arrive, prisoner interrogations from the Brest Peninsula. The interrogators ask standard questions, name, rank, unit, how did you get captured? Then they ask about the leaflets. 77% of German prisoners say they read at least one Allied leaflet before surrendering. 77%. McClure reads the report 3 times, checks the methodology, confirms the sample size. The number holds. Then comes the detail that changes everything. 80% of prisoners taken on the Brest Peninsula had leaflets in their possession when captured, not nearby, not dropped recently. In their pockets, in their boots, inside their tunics. They were carrying them, on purpose, deliberately. The interrogation reports include specific incidents, stories that read like fiction but arrive with verification from multiple sources. 3 German soldiers approach American lines. They're walking slowly, hands raised, no weapons visible, but they're not waving a white flag. They're holding a single piece of red paper. Each man grips one corner, like they're carrying something precious, something fragile that might tear if handled carelessly. The American soldiers see them, check for weapons, find none, ask about the paper. It's official, one of the Germans says in broken English. We have the document, 1 document, 3 men. They shared it because only one of them found a leaflet, but all 3 wanted to surrender. So they compromised, 1 corner each. The 3rd man walking in the middle to make sure everyone could hold it. The story makes its way up the chain, lands on McClure's desk. He reads it twice, doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. Another report, another incident. A German soldier surrenders alone, walks into American lines during a lull in fighting. Officers check him for intelligence. Ask the standard questions. The soldier reaches into his jacket, pulls out the passierschein, points to the signature at the bottom. I have a document, he says in careful German, bearing the personal signature of General Eisenhower. He says it with pride, like he's presenting credentials, like the paper makes him official. Protected, safe. The Americans treat him according to the promises on the leaflet. Food, medical screening, transport to a powder compound behind the lines. Within 24 hours, he's eating hot rations and sleeping in a tent instead of a foxhole. Word spreads, not through official channels, through the grapevine that exists in every war. Soldier to soldier. The Americans keep their promises. The leaflet works. If you surrender with the paper, they take care of you. By October 1944, the official tally confirms what the stories suggest. 77% of German prisoners read the leaflets. The Passierschein is working. But working for whom? And at what cost? Because here's what the statistics don't tell you. Every German who surrendered because of a leaflet made a choice his officers would call treason. Every promise kept by the Americans proved that the enemy could be trusted more than the Führer. Every piece of red paper in a German soldier's pocket was a small betrayal, a crack in the foundation of loyalty. Is that honorable warfare or something darker? November 1944, McClure's crisis. Intelligence reports arrive from forward interrogation units. A German major, recently captured, sits for questioning. His testimony will later prove prophetic when similar statements emerge from hundreds of prisoners in early 1945. Standard questions first. Then the interrogator asks about psychological warfare, about Allied leaflets, about the Passierschein specifically. The major speaks with surprising candor. Later, the interrogator will note that the prisoner seemed relieved to talk, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally found someone to share the weight. The Passierschein was the most effective Allied leaflet I saw during the war, the major says. In my opinion, if captivity was really as good as the leaflet promised, it was much better to surrender than to fight on. The interrogator makes notes. Asks the obvious follow-up question, but you didn't surrender voluntarily? No, the major says, I did not become a prisoner voluntarily. The transcript arrives on McClure's desk 3 weeks later. He reads it in his office, alone, door closed. The major is right. The Passierschein is effective. It works. It convinces German soldiers that surrender is better than death. That's exactly what it's designed to do. But the major didn't surrender. He kept fighting until he was captured. Until the choice was taken from him. So did the leaflet save his life, or just plant a seed of doubt that made him less effective as a soldier? Less willing to die for a cause he no longer believed in? And if it's the latter, is that manipulation? Psychological warfare that corrupts honor? Makes men betray their oaths? McClure served 27 years before this war, rose from second lieutenant to brigadier general, learned that soldiers are defined by duty, by honor, by the willingness to follow orders even when those orders lead to death. Now he's in the business of breaking that bond, making enemy soldiers doubt. Question: choose survival over duty. Is that honorable warfare? Or something else? He thinks about the boys on Omaha Beach, the paratroopers who landed in darkness and died in hedgerows, the tank crews who burned alive in Normandy. Every American soldier who died because a German soldier chose duty over survival. How many of those deaths could have been prevented if more Germans had chosen survival over duty? How many American boys came home because a piece of red paper convinced their enemies to quit? The mathematics are brutal, but they're clear. Jackson finds McClure in his office that night. Doesn't knock, just walks in, sits down across from him. You're thinking about honor, Jackson says. Not a question, a statement. McClure looks up, doesn't deny it. We're giving them a choice, Jackson continues. That's more than Hitler ever gave anyone, more than the SS gives their own men. We're saying you can live, you can go home, you can survive this war. By betraying their oaths, McClure says. By choosing life over death in a war they can't win. That's not betrayal, that's wisdom. McClure wants to argue. Wants to defend the idea that honor matters more than survival. That duty must be absolute or it means nothing. But he can't, because he knows Jackson is right. The war is lost for Germany. Every German soldier who dies between now and the end dies for nothing. Dies because honor demanded it. And honor, McClure realizes, is a luxury the defeated cannot afford. He thinks about the 3 soldiers sharing one leaflet. The major who believed the promises but kept fighting until capture took the choice away. The thousands of Germans who picked up the Passierschein read it, folded it carefully, and hid it somewhere safe. Just in case. They're not traitors. They're survivors. Men who want to live long enough to go home, to see their families, to rebuild from the ashes of a war they never wanted. The Passierschein gives them permission, makes surrender official, honorable, a choice sanctioned by the highest authority they can imagine, the signature of the Supreme Commander himself. How many? McClure asks finally. Jackson knows what he's asking. How many leaflets? How many chances? How many promises have we made? Nearly 6 billion, Jackson says. By the time this is over, 6 billion pieces of paper. Each one a promise, each one signed by Eisenhower. McClure does the math in his head. 6 billion leaflets, 5 million German soldiers, over 1,000 leaflets per soldier. Saturation, ubiquity. No German in the field can claim they never saw one. Every soldier has been given the choice, multiple times, in multiple ways. What they do with that choice is on them. The numbers tell a story that words cannot. Nearly 6 billion leaflets dropped over Europe between June 1944 and May 1945, the largest printing operation in military history. 80% of Britain's offset printing capacity, millions of pounds of paper, tons of specialized ink, engraving plates that cost more than some bombers. The Passierschein becomes the most widely distributed document in the war, more common than ration cards, more prevalent than orders. In some sectors, German soldiers find more leaflets than bullets. One specific leaflet code, ZG61, accounts for 65,750,000 individual prints. Just one code, one design, one variation on the basic theme, 65 million promises, 65 million chances. Carl Burgers writes the analysis in 1959. An official US Army report on psychological warfare effectiveness. His conclusion is stark. The Passierschein was continuously improved based on prisoner interrogation results. Each production run incorporated feedback from the field. The Allied Psychological Warfare Division treated it like a product, tested it, refined it, made it better. Like a product, that's Jackson's influence. Madison Avenue methodology applied to military operations, customer feedback, continuous improvement, responsive design, but the customers are enemy soldiers, and the product is surrender. The interrogators keep asking, keep collecting data. By the end of 1944, the pattern is clear. German soldiers treat the Passierschein differently than other propaganda. They don't throw it away. Don't use it for cigarette paper or toilet paper like other Allied leaflets. They keep it, hide it, protect it, because it might be the most valuable thing they own. A ticket home, a promise of survival, a way out signed by Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. What Jackson discovers changes everything. The interrogation reports come from multiple sources, not just German soldiers, Holocaust survivors, concentration camp inmates, resistance fighters, people who saw the leaflets from a different angle, who understood their impact in ways the planners never imagined. The testimony arrives in fragments, scattered accounts from people who survived horrors that defy description, but the pattern emerges, clear, undeniable. The Passierschein didn't just encourage German soldiers to surrender, it saved lives in the camps. Here's how it worked. SS guards received strict orders, picked up Allied leaflets meant death. Shot on sight, no exceptions. The SS wanted absolute loyalty, total commitment, no contamination from enemy propaganda, but the leaflets fell everywhere, in camps, in ghettos. In the forests where prisoners worked as slave labor, they fell like snow, impossible to avoid, impossible to ignore. Some prisoners picked them up, hid them in their clothes, read them in secret, passed them among trusted friends. The leaflet said, "We know you are carrying prisoners. If you harm them, you will be executed on the spot when we liberate this area. Do not hurt them. Help them, direct, clear, a promise and a threat." And the German guards read them too, found them on the ground, in the barracks, brought to them by informers or collaborators. They read the words, saw Eisenhower's signature, understood the message. The SS might shoot you for reading Allied propaganda, but the Americans would shoot you for killing prisoners. Some guards made their calculations, started treating prisoners better, not out of compassion, out of self-preservation, planning for the day when the Americans arrived and judgments would be rendered. One survivor remembers it clearly. Spring 1945. American planes flew low over the camp, dropped leaflets in broad daylight. The SS ordered everyone to ignore them, threatened death for anyone who picked one up. But a woman ran into the forest, retrieved a leaflet, read it, showed it to others in secret. "It said they know about us," the survivor recalls in testimony years later. "It said the Germans would be punished if they hurt us. It gave us hope. After so long without hope, it gave us something." Another survivor describes watching planes drop leaflets over a death march, thousands of prisoners being forced through mountains, guards shooting anyone who couldn't keep pace, bodies left on the roadside. Then the planes came, low enough to see the markings. American, not dropping bombs, dropping paper. The guards became nervous, the survivor testifies, not strict like before. Some of them talked about the leaflets, about what would happen when the Americans arrived. A few guards even helped prisoners who were weak, shared water. allowed rest breaks, things they never did before. The leaflets changed the mathematics for everyone, not just soldiers deciding whether to fight or surrender, guards deciding whether to follow orders or preserve their own lives. Prisoners deciding whether to endure one more day. For the planners at SHAF, this was unintended. The Passierschein targeted soldiers, combatants, men with weapons who could choose to stop fighting. But war doesn't recognize boundaries. Leaflets fall where they fall. Words reach whoever reads them. Consequences ripple outward in ways no one can predict. McClure reads these testimonies after the war. Sits in his office in occupied Germany with reports spread across his desk, stories from survivors, evidence that the psychological warfare campaign did more than convince soldiers to surrender. It saved people in the camps. Not everyone, not enough, but some. How many? Impossible to calculate. Impossible to know which guard refrained from pulling a trigger because of a leaflet. Which prisoner survived because a guard showed mercy after reading Eisenhower's warning. But it happened. Multiple sources confirm it. Independent testimonies from people who never met, who survived different camps. Different marches, different horrors, all telling the same story. The leaflets mattered. The promises reached beyond soldiers. The words saved lives in ways the planners never imagined. Jackson reads the reports too. Feels something he didn't expect. Pride mixed with horror. They saved people, but they couldn't save everyone. The camps still operated. The killing continued, right up until liberation. 6 billion leaflets weren't enough. All the promises in the world couldn't stop the machinery of genocide once it started running. But they helped, at the margins, in small ways. Individual guards making individual choices. Individual prisoners holding on to hope for one more day, and sometimes that was enough. Here's the question nobody wants to ask. If the leaflets saved lives in the camps, lives the planners never intended to save, what else did they do that nobody planned for? What other consequences rippled outward from 6 billion promises? And when the war ended, would anyone remember? Victory in Europe. The war is over. But the story of the Passierschein? That story is just beginning. Because the lesson, that wars can be won with ideas, not just bullets, will be forgotten. Then relearned in blood, then forgotten again, over and over, for the next 70 years. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe ends. Church bells ring across London. Celebrations fill the streets. Soldiers embrace. Strangers dance. The killing stops. At SHAF headquarters, the atmosphere is quieter. Relieved, exhausted. The kind of tired that comes from carrying weight so long you forget what it feels like to stand up straight. The Psychological Warfare Division begins shutting down. Personnel reassigned, files boxed, equipment catalogued. The massive printing operation that consumed 80% of Britain's offset capacity winds down to nothing. The leaflets stop falling. The promises stop scattering across battlefields. The war of paper ends with the war of bullets. Robert McClure receives new orders. Chief of the Information Control Division. Responsible for controlling German media in occupied territories, radio stations, newspapers, publishing houses, making sure Nazism stays dead and democracy has a chance to grow. Different mission, same principle. Words matter. Ideas matter. What people believe shapes what they do. Charles Douglas Jackson returns to civilian life, managing director of Time Life International, back to Madison Avenue, back to selling magazines instead of selling surrender. But he carries the experience with him, knows what propaganda can do, what psychological warfare can accomplish when executed properly. Dwight Eisenhower becomes the hero, the man who won the war. Parades, medals, speeches, everyone knows his name, everyone wants to shake his hand, thank him for victory, for bringing the boys home. But there's a question no one asks. A question that matters more than parades. How many lives did the leaflets save? The number is impossible to calculate. You can't count deaths that didn't happen. Can't measure battles that were won without fighting. Can't quantify the American soldiers who came home because German soldiers chose surrender over death. But the evidence exists. 77% of German prisoners read the leaflets before surrendering. 80% of prisoners on the Brest Peninsula carried them when captured. Thousands of individual testimonies. Thousands of stories about men who chose life. Somewhere between those statistics and stories lives the truth. The Passierschein worked. Not perfectly, not universally, but it worked. Eisenhower's gamble paid off. 6 billion pieces of paper. 6 billion promises. 6 billion chances to choose survival, and enough Germans took the chance to matter. McClure knows this, lives with it, carries it forward into occupation duty, but he also knows something else. Something that keeps him awake some nights in his office in Germany. The lesson won't last. The knowledge will be forgotten. The capability will dissolve. He's seen it before. After the Great War, the psychological warfare capability that existed in 1918 vanished. Dismantled, forgotten, lost to budget cuts and peacetime indifference. Now it's happening again. He can feel it. The same institutional amnesia, the same assumption that psychological warfare only matters during war, that in peacetime bullets and bombs are enough. It's wrong, dangerously wrong. But McClure is one general among many, one voice among thousands, and peacetime has its own priorities. January 1946. McClure writes a letter to the War Department. The letter is formal, measured, but urgent underneath the military prose. He's trying to sound professional while screaming that the institution is making a terrible mistake. The ignorance about psychological warfare among military personnel even now is astounding, he writes. We fought this war with psychological weapons that proved their worth. Now we're throwing away that capability like it never mattered. He explains the statistics, the prisoner interrogations, the evidence that psychological warfare saved American lives, shortened the war, reduced casualties on both sides. He requests that psychological warfare be integrated into military training, that doctrine be written, that capability be preserved for the next war. Because there will be a next war. McClure knows it. Everyone who thinks seriously about the future knows it. The Soviet Union is not an ally. It's a competitor, an adversary waiting for the right moment. When that moment comes, America needs to be ready to fight with words as well as weapons. The War Department thanks him for his input, files the letter, does nothing. June 1947, McClure tries again. This time he goes directly to his old boss, General Dwight Eisenhower, now Chief of Staff of the United States Army, the man whose signature appeared on 6 billion leaflets, who bet his credibility on the power of psychological warfare. The memo is direct, blunt. Psychological warfare must become part of every future war plan, McClure writes. We cannot allow this capability to disappear again. Eisenhower reads it, agrees with it, sends it forward with his endorsement. The bureaucracy absorbs it, acknowledges it, and largely ignores it. November 1947, McClure provides Eisenhower with a list, names of former PWD chef staff members, people who understand psychological warfare, who could form the core of a reserve capability, keep the knowledge alive even if the active duty capability dissolves. Eisenhower files the list, promises to use it when the time comes. But the time doesn't come. The budget cuts continue, the demobilization accelerates, the institutional knowledge scatters. Men who understood psychological warfare return to civilian life. Their expertise lost to insurance companies and advertising agencies and universities. By 1949, the psychological warfare capability that operated in 1945 barely exists. Only the Army Reserve maintains any real competence. And reserves don't drive doctrine, don't shape planning, don't influence the generals who will fight for the next war. McClure watches it happen, fights it where he can, writes memos, makes phone calls, tries to preserve what they built, but he's fighting institutional gravity, and gravity always wins. June 25, 1950, North Korea invades South Korea. The Cold War turns hot. American soldiers deploy to fight communism on the Korean peninsula. And the Army discovers once again that it has no psychological warfare capability, no trained personnel, no doctrine, no equipment, no institutional memory of what worked in the last war. They have to rebuild from scratch, relearn lessons that were known in 1945 and forgotten by 1950. It takes months, precious months, while soldiers die, while opportunities slip away, while the enemy uses psychological warfare and America struggles to respond. In September 1950, the Army creates a new psychological warfare division in the G3 staff. They need someone to run it, someone who knows the field, who has experience, who can rebuild the capability quickly. There's only one name on the short list, Robert A. McClure, 53 years old. 4 years of pushing bureaucratic rocks uphill, 4 years of watching his warnings come true. He takes the job, not because he wants it, because no one else can do it. Because American soldiers are dying and psychological warfare might save them. By January 1951, McClure becomes Chief of the Office of the Chief of Psychological Warfare, a new position. Created specifically because the Korean War proved the necessity, proved that wars are fought with ideas as well as bullets, McClure begins rebuilding, activating units, writing doctrine, training personnel. Creating the Psychological Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, establishing the foundation for what will eventually become U.S. Army Special Warfare. It's everything he tried to preserve in 1946. Everything he begged the Army to maintain, now being rebuilt at emergency speed because Christ demands it, the waste eats at him. 4 years lost, capability discarded, knowledge scattered. Now being reassembled piece by piece while soldiers die, but he does the work, because that's what soldiers do. They complete the mission regardless of cost. Presidential election year. Dwight Eisenhower runs for president, war hero, supreme commander, the man who defeated Hitler. His campaign needs someone who understands communication, psychology, how to shape public perception and win votes. They call C.D. Jackson. Jackson left Time Life to become president of the Free Europe Committee in 1951. Running Radio Free Europe, broadcasting American values behind the Iron Curtain. Psychological warfare against the Soviet Union. The same techniques that worked against Germany now applied to communism. But he takes time to write speeches for Eisenhower's campaign, applies Madison Avenue methodology to politics. Understands what voters want to hear, how to craft messages that resonate, what promises will persuade, different audience, same principles. Psychology doesn't change just because the target wears a suit instead of a uniform. Eisenhower wins, landslide, becomes the 34th President of the United States, and in February 1953 he repays Jackson's service, Special Assistant to the President for Psychological Warfare. A White House position created specifically for Jackson. His area of responsibility includes international affairs, Cold War planning, and coordinating psychological operations across government agencies. The job makes Jackson the president's liaison between the CIA and the Pentagon, between State Department diplomats and military planners, between the people who fight with bullets and the people who fight with ideas. He works closely with the Psychological Strategy Board. Then, when that's reorganized, the Operations Coordinating Board coordinates information campaigns, plans psychological operations. Advises the President on how to win the Cold War without fighting World War III. Everything he learned in London, everything he developed at PWD, SHAF-F, now applied at the highest levels of government. Shaping American strategy in the global struggle against communism. 3 men, 3 paths, now converging again. Eisenhower in the White House. McClure rebuilding psychological warfare capability at Fort Bragg. Jackson coordinating Cold War information operations, the same team that bet on paper leaflets in 1944, now fighting a different war with the same weapons, words, ideas, psychology. The patient application of persuasion to change minds and shape behavior. Radio Free Europe broadcasts into Soviet satellite states. Voice of America carries American values worldwide. Psychological warfare units deployed to Korea. Information campaigns counter communist propaganda across Europe and Asia. The techniques developed for the Passierschein, factualism, authenticity, specific promises, continuous improvement based on feedback, all applied to the Cold War. Different enemy. Different battlefield. Same fundamental truth. What people believe matters more than what weapons they carry. Change beliefs and you change behavior. Change behavior and you change outcomes. Win the war of ideas, and you might not have to fight the war of bullets. That's the lesson from 1944, the lesson that was almost forgotten, the lesson now being applied at global scale. January 1, 1957, Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Robert Alexis McClure dies of a heart attack, 59 years old, less than a year after retiring from active duty. Brigadier General, father of youth. Army Special Warfare, the man who rebuilt what the bureaucracy destroyed. He never saw peace. Fought in World War I, served between the wars, led psychological warfare in World War II. Spent his final years preparing for the next war. Died believing that psychological warfare matters, that ideas are weapons, that honor and manipulation can coexist if the cause is just and the promises are kept. The obituaries are respectful but brief. A general died, one of thousands who served, one of hundreds who held important commands. His specific contributions mentioned but not emphasized. The army knows what he did. The people who served under him know. But the broader public doesn't understand, can't comprehend, doesn't have the context to appreciate what he built. How do you explain to civilians that a general who never commanded combat troops saved more lives than some who did, that paper and ink can be as important as steel and lead? You can't, not really, not in ways they'll understand. So McClure's legacy lives in the institution, in the training programs at Fort Bragg, in the doctrine manuals that codify what he learned, in the special forces units that trace their lineage to his vision. But the man himself, largely forgotten outside military circles. One more general who served with distinction and died too soon. September 18, 1964, New York City. Charles Douglas Jackson dies at 62, heart attack. Like McClure, the obituaries mention his civilian accomplishments: publisher of Life magazine, presidential advisor, Time Inc., executive, but they don't mention the psychological warfare, don't connect the magazine publisher to the man who helped design 6 billion leaflets. Only the files at the Eisenhower Presidential Library preserve that story. March 28, 1969. Washington, D.C. Dwight David Eisenhower dies at 78. His funeral is a national event. The obituaries mention D-Day, the Germans' surrender, presidential leadership, but they don't mention the Passierschein. Don't explain how 6 billion promises helped end the war. That's relegated to footnotes, and the lesson that wars can be won with ideas as well as weapons has to be relearned every generation. January 19, 2001, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The United States Army Special Operations Command dedicates its headquarters building. The ceremony is formal, military precision, color guard, national anthem, generals in dress uniform, speeches about heritage and mission and the legacy of those who served. The building receives a name, McClure Hall, named for Brigadier General Robert A. McClure, father of U.S. Army Special Warfare, the man who understood that winning hearts and minds matters as much as winning battles. The dedication plaque explains his service. Philippine Constabulary, World War I. Psychological Warfare Division in World War II. Rebuilding the capability for Korea, creating the foundation for modern special operations. It doesn't mention the Passierschein specifically. Doesn't explain the 6 billion leaflets or the 77% of prisoners who read them, doesn't calculate lives saved or battles won without fighting, but the building exists, the name is preserved. The institution remembers even if individuals forget, and somewhere in the archives at Fort Bragg in climate-controlled storage, a few Passierschein leaflets survive. Red paper fading to pink, Eisenhower's signature still visible. The promises still readable. Physical evidence that once, in the largest war humanity ever fought, 3 men bet that paper could be stronger than bullets, that promises kept could win hearts, that giving the enemy a choice might save more lives than giving them no choice at all. The gamble paid off, the lesson was forgotten. The capability was lost and rebuilt again. Because institutions have short memories, bureaucracies resist complexity, and the idea that wars can be won without killing, that sounds too good to be true. Too naive, too optimistic for a world that runs on power and violence. But it worked. Once. Demonstrably, measurably. 77% of prisoners read the leaflets, 80% carried them. 3 soldiers shared one because they believed it mattered. A German major called it the most effective Allied propaganda he'd seen. 6 billion promises kept. 6 billion chances to choose life. And enough Germans took the chance to matter. But collectively, statistically, the evidence is overwhelming. The Passierschein saved lives. American lives. German lives. Lives of people in the camps who survived because guards read warnings and chose mercy over murder. Not everyone, not enough, but some, and in war, some is better than none. The final question remains, was it manipulation or mercy? McClure wrestled with that question until he died. Jackson answered it and moved on. Eisenhower never acknowledged the dilemma publicly. Different men, different answers. Psychological warfare didn't end with World War II. Jackson's work at Radio Free Europe became a model for Cold War information operations, broadcasting truth into dictatorships. Giving people behind the Iron Curtain access to information their governments suppressed. Voice of America, Radio Liberty, Television Marty, all descendants of the same idea that information is power. That what people believe shapes what they do. That changing minds can change nations. The techniques evolved. Radio became television. Television became internet. Internet became social media. The platforms changed, but the principles remained. Every information campaign traces its lineage back to those 3 men in a London bunker in 1944, back to the decision to print 6 billion pieces of paper and trust that promises kept could end a war. But the modern world forgot the constraint. Psychological warfare only works if promises are kept. Credibility, once lost, cannot be recovered. The Passierschein worked because it was honest persuasion, not deception. Every promise was kept. Every German who surrendered received exactly what the leaflet promised. That's the lesson that has to be relearned every generation. The one McClure died trying to preserve. The one Jackson applied in the Cold War. The one Eisenhower bet 6 billion pieces of paper on. Tell the truth. Keep your promises. Give people a choice. Trust that enough will choose wisely to matter. Simple truth. Hard to execute. Harder to maintain when pressure mounts and lies look easier, but it's the only way that works long term. The only strategy that builds credibility, that survives contact with reality. 3 men understood this, built a system around it, proved it could work at the largest scale imaginable. Then the institution forgot, the bureaucracy moved on, the next generation had to relearn the lesson. And now it's your turn, to remember or forget, to understand or dismiss, to recognize that the choices made in 1944 shaped the world you inherited. Your father came home from some war. Your grandfather survived some battle. Your family exists because someone, somewhere, made it through conflicts that killed millions. Maybe they were just lucky. Maybe they were skilled. Maybe they were blessed. Or maybe, somewhere along the line, an enemy soldier read a leaflet, believed a promise, made a choice, and laid down his weapon instead of pulling the trigger. You'll never know for sure. But 6 billion pieces of paper say it's possible. 6 billion promises kept say it happened, and 77% of German prisoners say it mattered. That's not manipulation. That's not deception. That's not the corruption of honor. That's giving people a choice between death and life, and trusting that enough will choose life to end a war. Eisenhower's gamble, McClure's obsession, Jackson's expertise, 3 men, 6 billion promises, one simple truth. Honor and mercy are not opposites, they're partners, and sometimes the most honorable thing you can do is offer your enemy a way to survive. Because war ends, nations rebuild, former enemies become allies, and the choices made in crisis echo through generations. The Passierschein ended in 1945, but the principle endures. Tell the truth. Keep your promises, give people a choice, and trust that enough will choose wisely to change the world.